Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Gas Resource Management Working Group. Today is Working Group 5. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be helping out with the WebEx portion today. And then I'm also joined on the line by our Working Group Facilitator, Mark Richardson. Before we get started, just a reminder that the presentation that we'll be sharing today is available out on the Working Group webpage. You can get to that page by going to CAISO.com. You'll click the Stay Informed tab. Under that tab, you'll see policy initiatives. That'll take you out to our main policy initiative landing page. And then on that page, you'll be able to navigate to the Gas Resource Management Working Group webpage, and the presentation will be the very first item posted on that page. So the call is being recorded today for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. If you need technical assistance at any point during the meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer. And then we will be pausing for comments and questions today. So if you connected to audio through your computer and use the call me option in WebEx, you can raise your hand using the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you dialed in separately to the conference today, you'll need to raise your hand by pressing #2. So we'll keep an eye on both the WebEx queue and the phone only line. And just remember to please state your name and affiliation before making your comment so we know who the comment or question is coming from. And then you can also send your question through the chat to me directly. Again, my name is Isabella Nicosia, or you can send it to all panelists. All right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark and we'll get things started.
Fantastic. Good morning. And just to confirm, you hear me okay, Isabella?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. If my audio gets choppy, please let me know. As you can tell, I am working from home today, and I'd be happy to kind of go off camera if need be. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had a fantastic weekend. We finally got some rain up here in Northern California, so it was a nice surprise for the weekend. As promised, we wanted to share the survey results at a high level based on the prioritization votes. So as you can see here, we are listing problem statements in order based on your feedback. I believe we had 10 total organizations provide responses, so I appreciate everyone doing that. We also had a few questions posed in the survey that we will be taking back as a team, discussing, and then following up with the community accordingly at the next meeting. So at a quick glance, as you can see, information around, not getting enough information, sufficient information around that, the overall procurement that's needed for your decisions was kind of that number one item here with a weighting of 9.5 out of 10. The problem statement number 1, participants do not have enough certainty in the accuracy of that 2-day ahead advisory. That one was kind of a very close second. And then right behind that, stakeholders continue to express the amount of volatility in the gas market and what that means as far as how to represent those costs in real time, the likelihood of being mitigated, and some of those other items. And then I would group the next 3 or 4 together, as well as, we got the first tier, problem statement 2, 1, and 3, and then the next 3 or 4, 5, 6, 8, and 4 problem statements, that next level. Some of those are related, as we discussed through this form. You talk about the manual reference level change request process and how burdensome it can be externally. We talked about how the automated process, those reasonableness thresholds are too low, which kind of push individuals to that manual reference level change request process. So some of those are kind of intertwined and related. And then the bottom tier there are around, able to reflect accurate costs due to limitation on the number of gas hubs. So we talked about that again as a community. I know Idaho had been voicing that. I know a few others have been voicing that based on how they're set up in the system. That one was ranked kind of low on a priority order from a priority order perspective. Excuse me, it's still early. And then use limit registration criteria. We're going to be talking about that one more in depth today as a follow-up from the last call. And then heat rates used for the reference level calculations, right? To the extent there needs to be a dynamic heat rate and what that looks like. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so just to kind of help tee up today's conversation, the ask of the group is kind of confirming the issues as we have them captured, and then talking about any of the supporting data needs, right? So let's identify those details or clarifications that are needed to help improve the problem or issue that's currently captured. Any questions that we have for the ISO SMEs in the form of background and or context to help you further understand that issue, let's be sure to raise that today. Let's talk about some measurable outcomes, impacts, and analysis that may be needed to help illustrate that issue. And then obviously provide any clarity on existing functionality that exists today to help manage that underlying issue. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Isabella. All right, so this is the last two that we have of the total 10 that were identified. So challenges expressed to date, resource limitations. Use limited registration criteria does not explicitly recognize unique reliability-based limitations of gas resources in a balancing area, and as a result, renders resources ineligible for the opportunity cost calculation. So just to kind of provide some context, as we did previously here, current rules have explicit categories or acceptable limitation criteria to establish this use limited status. During discussions, a stakeholder had raised that the limitation criteria should also account for a unique BAA's situation and needs, right? So today, if I was trying to boil down the challenge based on what I've heard through discussions, is that the risk of a generator getting committed in the market at the inappropriate cost, because those opportunity cost calculations, based on the way the resource is set up, doesn't necessarily provide the eligibility to kind of get those additional costs reflected in the market. So as a result of that, that BAA risks exhausting that unit throughout the year when it's really a unit that's needed to kind of help ensure reliability during those tight system conditions. And to the extent that stakeholder wants to kind of further weigh in and provide additional context, by all means do so. But the potential solution that we discussed as a group here was to allow for BAAs to account for other types of use limitations in that opportunity cost calculation. So I'd really like to hear from the group, are there other BAAs out there that have some resources that are kind of, quote unquote, in their back pocket that operations leans on heavily to get through these tight system conditions, that are unable to reflect that quote unquote opportunity cost in today's market based on the way these use limited registration criteria is defined today. So let me pause there, see if I can get a reaction from the group. If there's any ISO SME on today that would like to ask any additional questions they may have on this particular issue, or if it's appropriately captured here, I would appreciate individuals weighing in. So let me pause there, see if we can get any hands up willing to jump in here. Or are we saying I captured it correctly? Can I get a thumbs up from the group or a reaction via the WebEx if I appropriately articulated that based on what we heard today? Not seeing anything, so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say we appropriately categorize this issue. We could always come back to it in later discussions and things like that. By all means, this is not necessarily the last time we will get together as a group as we kind of continue going down that solution space road. All right, well, if I'm not hearing anything here, I'm gonna say let's go to the next slide unless I see Sylvie on. Sylvie, did you have any additional questions here? I also see Katie on. Katie, did you have any additional questions on this slide before we move on for the group? I see Sylvie with her hand up. Go ahead, Sylvie. Thank you.
There we go.
There you go.
I'll just note, thanks. I'll just note that more specificity on this would be really helpful for us as we go back and look at whether or not we have other ways for resources to reflect their use limited, their use limitations or what else is in the market. So it's just, there's lots of functionality. And the more specificity we get with this, the better we can help you.
Got it. No, that's good. Thank you, Sylvie. And we'll absolutely have opportunities when we get to kind of the next step slide. There will be opportunities for stakeholders to kind of continue weighing in as we move out here. I see a comment from Robert Fisher. Looks like we captured the topic well. Thank you, Robert. Appreciate your feedback on that. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Isabella. Thank you. All right, so this one we started talking a little bit about on the last call, but we deferred those conversations until we got to the slide. And what kind of brought this issue up is when we were talking about bidding flexibility and things of that nature. So let me just state the issue, give some context, and then talk about the potential solution that we've framed through these discussions, and then let's get a reaction from the group. And I will start calling on individuals if you guys don't help me out here. So gas system limitations. Gas burn limitations issued by gas companies are not reflected in the market for WEIM balancing areas, which may lead to inaccurate or infeasible unit commitment or dispatch instructions. From a context perspective, by reflecting a fuel burn limitation in the market, it would ensure feasible awards, hence increasing reliability of both the gas and energy systems and relieve entities of that financial exposure. I have a question here because, you know, as the issue stated, you know, this is a problem for BAAs. My question would be is how is this managed today? And then let's get some discussion there. But let me just quickly throw out the potential solution that was raised, which was to utilize the gas company burn limitations in the market optimization as an input. So let me pause there, and if anyone's willing to weigh in on how this is managed today for their specific area, I would love to hear that feedback. Michelle from LA, thank you, and good morning.
So as far as for LA, one of the things that we really implemented is we sharpen up our tools a little bit more so that we could have like an indicator of what our actual burns are and the forecast. So what we do is we look at each cycle, see how much gas is coming into the pipe, and depending on like the OFO, the tolerance, we calculate where forecasted burns are. But every couple of hours we look at it to ensure that what was forecast is actually materializing. If we do deviate from it and we have to buy additional gas or sell additional gas because we're running a risk of not meeting it, we'll go ahead and participate in the real-time market. But I think the key points here is the tools, not only utilizing the forecast, but in real time, now we're bringing in what each plant is actually burning, either by PI or CSV files, whatever real-time tools, whatever tools any of the entities end up having. We have an automatic upload and interface where we look at that for visibility.
Gotcha.
This is something
And
that
so
models could handle. I just don't know if like it would need to be a big collaboration, because at that point if they want to implement it with KAISO, then you're gonna have to have interfaces from each of the units, gas units or resources that are participating in the market.
So Michelle, if today you see that, you know, there's been hey, you're only allowed, there's like a max burn that's been provided to, you know, a set of generators based on that pipeline. Today, what I heard you say is we utilize the associated forecast. So what you anticipate burning, you compare that on a, you know, hourly multi-hour check where say, where are we actually at from a burn rate energy dispatch perspective? And then to the extent you're getting close to hitting that threshold, you would update what's available to the energy market accordingly to avoid burning too much. Is that an accurate assessment of what I just heard?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I see Paul Wood from PAC. see the mute toggle in
Can
there.
you hear me now?
Oh, good morning, Paul. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Sorry about that. Hey, I think we would agree with, I think what Michelle was getting at, that from our perspective, this is more of a specific plant limitation as opposed to a specific, gas company.
So when you say specific plant, you mean like on a given pipe, like almost like a pipeline limitation, or you're saying this is resource specific itself, and that resource is only able to burn X amount of gas per day?
Yeah, I mean the nomination that we make for a specific plant, there could be a couple plants located on that
Mhm.
pipe, and together they need to manage the nomination within the pipeline restrictions.
Got it. Okay, so when we originally started talking about this, I kind of always envision this issue as, these max burn limitations that are getting issued. I think the easiest example is Aliso Canyon, right? Where in this whole area, we're only allowed to burn X amount of gas due to the gas system limitation. But what I heard you just state is, depending on what is nominated by the entity in the gas timeline cycles, there needs to be the ability to potentially limit the energy awards based on what was nominated, almost like going back to that daily energy limit that I think was talked about a few calls back. Is
Right.
that, am I tracking
Yes.
with you? Okay,
Yeah,
got it. Okay, no, that's interesting. Thank you, Paul.
and that's where
Go ahead.
Pacific Corp manages, those restrictions is, they'll give the real-time folks a bandwidth to manage within, which even includes EIM.
And with that bandwidth, you're just updating those energy bids accordingly based on what you're forecasted to need from an energy perspective. Maybe you make that generator a little bit more expensive to participate now so that you're able to utilize it through, that evening load pull.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in real time, they're managing or monitoring the burns in real time, and they're adjusting the bidding accordingly to ensure that they stay within those limitations for that specific resource.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate you being willing to share. All right. I see Julie from TEP, and then I'm going to go to Robert Fisher from NV. Go ahead, Julie. Good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. I just wanted to clarify, thanks for PacifiCorp adding that detail. That I think that's really helpful to the conversation. For the folks who are not as involved with the gas management, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood, though, that it's not always a particular unit. It could be multiple units depending on where the constraint specifically lies in the gas pipeline. So in the Desert Southwest, for example, you can have certain gas alert days where it only impacts maybe one or two of your resources at a specific site, or it impacts 3 or 4 because of where the specific gas pipeline constraint is. So yeah, and we do have to manage our bidding strategies. And I think this does kind of fold into another item that was on the survey, which has to do with bid mitigations, because we do run into some challenges on days when that is happening, and the additional options that are available to us for managing those real-time burn numbers in the market.
Right. So if I was trying to boil that down from my understanding, it's, hey, there's multiple units depending on where that gas system constraint is that potentially are impacted. And one of the tools that we've heard to manage that is to, make that particular unit a little bit more costly, right? You represent those costs. And as a result of doing so, you risk getting mitigated, which kind of undermines that particular tool in the tool bag to try to manage that gas burn. Is that a fair statement, Julie? I'm going to assume yes. All right, let me go to Robert Fisher.
Mark, this is Robert Fisher with NVU. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Okay. Just to let you know, the thumbs up thing isn't working. Anyway.
Okay.
I think I just wanted to kind of comment and agree with pretty much everything that everybody else said. Each comment had a component of each of our kind of strategies. We'll kind of let things go for the important time frames of the day, and in the evening, if we need to make adjustments based on pipeline, we will make resources try to run at a higher level or a lower level to stay within those limitations for the day. But we do not procure more or less. We try to manage the gas burn based upon what we use during the day, and then in the evening use some bid strategies to kind of go above or below or stay within our limits. And just want to also emphasize the NPM aspect of the comment. That is an important component for our bid strategies that are reliant upon using these for gas burns.
So I appreciate that, Robert, and I appreciate the way you framed that. Before I let you drop, so looking at this solution here, can you talk, in an ideal world, how, what are your thoughts on, how would the utilization of those burn limitations in the market be reflected? Is it is it at the BA level? Like, can you walk me through what your thoughts are there, if you've thought about it? If not, I get, same question posed to the audience.
I honestly don't have a solution right now. I know CAISO's default or idea is to go to these gas nomograms. I have concerns in regards to that because there's been no conversation around how the gas nomograms would interface with an RSE test, for example.
Right, right. Like, what are those ramifications?
And that's why this 7 a.m. timeline is so important, because if we were to do it afterwards and the commitments after the 10 a.m. type EDAN are so much different, then managing the gas after that situation is going to be very difficult.
Got it. No, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you. Let me go to Joe at SRP, and then I'm going to go to Michelle at LA.
Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it,
Okay,
Joe.
great. Yeah, I think for SRP and maybe the entities in Arizona with fairly large gas portfolios, I think we would like this limitation to be more fleet-wide than by specific plant. On days when there are not OFO/penalty conditions in place, we could run the risk of a little bit of an arbitrary allotment. If we have X amount of gas scheduled and we then take a piece of that and apply it as a limit to each plant. Well, depending on how critical the conditions are that day, if one plant were to trip offline, you could possibly divert that gas to another plant. And now you're going to exceed the limit that you provided CAISO maybe on a day ahead basis. And I don't know.
For that specific unit?
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
I mean, if it's a big, huge summer day and everything's at max capacity, yeah, then it's kind of easy. But as you head into this time of year, it could get a little bit tricky. And then the day after, you're explaining why you went over the limit you applied. Furthermore, despite all the shortcomings in Arizona on our pipelines, one thing that some of the entities do enjoy is, at least on one pipeline, our plants are grouped, almost like a city gate, if you will, a delivery code. And gas scheduled to that code can be burned at any plant on a no notice type basis. So that would also make it a bit tricky to have plant by plant limitations. Again, maybe a tool that allows for that if one particular plant due to maintenance, gas flows, whatever, cannot ramp up. But I think for the most part, we would prefer a system-wide limitation, and then we'll manage plant by plant within that limitation, as opposed to a hard plant by plant limit, if that made sense.
Yeah, I think so, but I've heard through everyone, and I appreciate your comments, Joe. I've heard through, I think, all these responses a little bit different flavor than what I was originally thinking here that I've been hearing. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm hearing that it's not necessarily, or maybe it's two issues. Is it a reliability gas system constraint that we're talking about that we need to figure out how to account for? Or is it a, hey, we procured as an entity in that timely gas non-cycle, you know, I'm just going to say, I don't know, 100,000 megawatt hours when you do the conversion over our whole BA, and we want to manage within that, right? So are we talking about potentially going outside of that nomination cycle, or are we talking about a gas system reliability constraint due to a pipeline being out, due to the inability to withdraw or inject into a, you know, a storage area? What are your thoughts on that, Joe?
I think they all feed into, they're all variables that feed into the same final solution. So yes, you have market liquidity, both in the timely cycle and then on a real-time basis. You know, the timely cycle would kind of be known. The real time, you would have to make some type of an estimate. And then, you know, the next variable in the equation, you know, are we on a no OFO day, when the pipelines are operating within normal ranges, and the amount of gas that we could, you know, the degree to which our burns could swing from what our timely nom is wider than it would be under an OFO type day. So I think ultimately they work their way into the same system-wide limitation. They're just different variables in the equation to get to that limit. If that, I'm not sure that answered your question somewhat or not.
I think so. Yeah, no, it helped me. It spawned a few more questions I had, because I'm thinking about, and as the potential solution states here is, you know, which entity is responsible for inputting that? And, you know, if it's obviously a gas system reliability constraint, that information is provided by the gas company.
That's going to be tricky, because the vast majority of the time it's going to provide for some type of forecasting on the part of each entity. And for example, with regards to real-time liquidity, and that forecast might not materialize. And after the fact, CAISO could say, well, you told us your limit with that was X, and in hindsight, you went a little bit above X. So the only real way to, well, maybe there's more than one way, but you got to give the entity some discretion in running their gas fleet and the associated gas supply. And I don't know if it could ever be reduced truly 100% to a formula that CAISO could see every day. There's going to be some seat of the pants estimates made by the gas trading or the power trading teams, you know, that are really a day-over-day forecast. And that's just the world that we kind of live in, and you really need that flexibility as you enter a market like this.
Do you envision, and I apologize to keep going further, Joe, but this is a good back and forth. Do you envision this, I'm just going to call it a constraint input. Do you believe this constraint input would be utilized more, or makes more sense to utilize in the day ahead time frame versus the real time time frame? Because obviously, you know, energy has to meet demand, right?
Yeah. Well, obviously you have your best, you know, your degree of error certainly gets reduced as you move into real time. So on that hand, I would say real time is probably better. But at the same point in time, if we're going to provide that constraint to CAISO as they run the algorithms for you know, the day ahead energy profiles, the energy awards, You almost need two, I guess. You need an initial day ahead limitation. And then maybe if you say, hey, the system looked very constrained for tomorrow, we bought X, let's say 105% of X is our day ahead limit. Now you get into the real time market and any number of things could happen that ease the constraints in the market. Now you might have a little bit more than you could burn than what you thought than what you projected on a day ahead basis. And then hopefully that's something you could offer additionally into the real time market. But you really need, I mean, that's how we operate. You know, you have a starting point, day ahead, you put your plans together, and then as real time unfolds, as it is for most of us right now in EIM, you make adjustments accordingly.
Got it. No, I appreciate that, Joe. Thank you.
You bet.
Let's see if we can get reaction from others. So let's go to Michelle from LA next, and then John from PNM.
So I'll comment with some, I guess, like examples. I agree. We probably do have an indicator day ahead, and but that
When you
number
say you have an
could-
indicator, are you talking about a forecast, Michelle? Like, help me. What do you mean by indicator and day
Yeah,
ahead?
we probably have an indicator. Entities probably have an indicator of what your like minimum or maximum volumes
Got it.
are going to be day ahead, but those numbers are dynamic. Like if they're connected and they're connected to any other pipeline, they might make movements if the pipe cuts some of the gas because of this reliability issue. That also impacts the minimum or maximum burns here. I do think that if a tool is developed, and when we talk about grouping plants, they call it in the pipeline end user. If an end user is nominating to 6 pipelines, then to 6 gas plants, then these 6 gas plants as a whole is going to have this restriction of, let's say that we have 100,000 MMBTUs that we must burn or that we cannot exceed. This applies to all 6 pipelines, not just like one individual. It doesn't matter what gas plant burns what, it's the total lump sum that is restricted to this maximum or minimum burns. These numbers are dynamic, like, and they're goal based of the nominations. It could change if, let's say, we're seeing that the market is dispatching more resources. We could go out and purchase or try to sell off some of the gas, but it's going to come at a cost. So that's more on like the bidding strategy, how that should be handled. But after, I think the biggest thing is, and I'm going to go ahead and focus specifically during, let's say, low OFO. The pipeline is telling you that if you exceed 100,000 MMBTUs, you're going to get penalized if the lump sum of this resources burns. After the ID3 timeline, we cannot physically procure any gas. So we have to have some kind of indication so that our bids actually reflect that OFO penalty.
Right. Let me try to unwrap a little bit. Going back to your 6 units behind a single, as end users behind that single constraint for that gas line, right? Using the 100,000 MMBTU. It sounds like today an entity will manage that via bids based on which pipeline or which unit they would like to see dispatched first, right? Based on economics and efficiencies and things like that. Are you saying a good outcome of whatever the solution would be to help manage these limitations would be that the market is seeing that 100,000 MMBTU and optimizing those 6 units with that constraint in mind?
Right.
Okay. I'm curious, I haven't heard from the ISO subject matter experts on this, and I know there's, I know through my own knowledge that we have OMS, right, outage management system to kind of help limit units based on how much fuel is available to them. which, you know, I can see if I put on my WEIM entity hat that may limit their capacity getting counted towards the associated tests. So I'm, you know, that's kind of a double-edged sword there. And then obviously, to the extent you want to make a certain generator more expensive because you're trying to, quote unquote, save it for later, you run into potential mitigation, which obviously kind of throws that, quote unquote, strategy out the window for you. And now you're stuck trying to figure out other ways to manage the total gas burn for those units behind that constraint. But I'm curious if there's any other things that this group should be thinking about from an ISO subject matter expert perspective. I don't know if Sylvie, if you have any questions from policy, or I see Guillermo on. Guillermo, I see Bob on. If you guys have any thoughts, please raise your hand. I'd be happy to call on you if you have any clarifying questions or anything you're looking for. But while we wait for you to raise your hand, let's go to John from PNM. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. I appreciate it. Good morning, John. I think I caught you at the end there.
I was just saying, can you hear me? That's okay.
Yeah.
So, I guess I'm gonna try to kind of focus my comment here, kind of trying to echo back some of the comments made about the need to model the fuel burn limitation. I do feel that there is basically like a need for a market seller to be able to say, for the following, you know, hours in the balance of the operating day, due to the gas nominated or pipeline limitation, our bid is limited by X amount of, you know, MMBTU. And what I heard, and I appreciate the comments, is that, well, you know, there is a potential use of, you know, changing the bid amount. And I think this is problematic for two reasons. One, it actually doesn't really convey what's going on to the ISO. So the ISO can't really plan the balance of the operating day appropriately. Two, there is kind of a need, you know, for factual accuracy. So when a market seller is submitting a bid to the ISO needs to have, you know, tools available so that what's being conveyed is factually accurate. And if there's no tool to actually convey what's going on, which is a fuel limitation, not a price difference, the market seller is kind of at a loss. You see what I'm saying? Like, you know, you got to be able to convey what you're trying to convey and be able to do it in a way such that it's factually accurate. If there is no avenue, you know, there is kind of a challenge there.
So, John, can you help me understand if you get a burn limitation for the day? I'm trying to, how is that related to a certain amount of hours? You know, let's just say 12 through 4 or 12 through 16, hour ending 12 through 16. Would that burn limitation only be for those specific hours, or you're saying during those specific hours, I know I need to limit the output of this unit because I may need it later? Like, can you walk me through what?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I was kind of equating the MMBTUs to number of hours of runtime. That's kind of a crude. It doesn't have to be that way.
Got it.
So if we can represent it as MMBTUs, like, because you could have your unit running at half capability and utilizing half the MMBTUs of it running at full capability. So it is more appropriate to use a limitation as MMBTU burn instead of hours burn. So that's the first distinction.
Got it.
The second distinction, it's a balance of the operating day concept. So what I'm kind of referring to is, Like, I may be able to buy gas for a nomination cycle that's earlier, but for the hours that are the last nomination cycle of the operating day, this is when the limitation might be different than the rest of the day. Does that make sense?
I believe so. Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you, John.
But I think at the minimum, if we can get just the element, basically the bid that says, my cost is X or my bid is X, irrespective of, what the X is, it is limited by X amount of MMBTUs. I can't really
Right.
exceed that. I don't think the solution is just to increase your bid. I don't think that is the solution.
Got it. You're saying if market prices materialize, let's remove the mitigation as a potential issue. If market, if supply is tight and market prices dictate it, you could still potentially get awarded above that max burn order that you received.
That's true, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is the factual accuracy point. Is the market seller needs a mechanism to convey what's actually happening.
Got it. And you're referring to this in real time as well as data.
In real time, yes, for an EIM entity, yeah. And
Right.
and just to kind of comment on the idea of using OMS, I don't think that's actually like really workable either. And here's why. The OMS says there is a full outage, like your unit is actually out, right? But in reality,
or some of it, correct.
Or derated, right? But in reality,
Yeah.
what's happening is you could actually may have enough gas to run the unit at full capability for a limited number of hours, or half capability for a limited number of hours, or whatever.
Right.
But it's actually not an outage. It's just that the amount of fuel is not enough. So representing it as an outage, you kind of run into the same problem of factual accuracy. You're saying my unit is out, but it's not.
Yeah. No,
So
I hear you. I hear your
I
point.
kind of feel like there really is kind of need to be thought of from, the factual accuracy perspective. Market needs to have a conduit to convey information. And if that conduit is not there, it's kind of a challenge that needs to be looked at.
Got it. I would love to hear from the ISO on what they've heard so far, if anyone's willing to raise their hand and chime in. Maybe talk about outside of OMS and bids. Is there any other avenues to try to help manage this, or what we've discussed so far is kind of those options? But to the extent you have any other clarifying questions and things like that, it'd be great if you wouldn't mind raising your hand and asking those. All right, Bob Cott. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, I think, seemed like two different burn limitations. I think the one that was just discussed was maybe a gas volume limitation that would be applied over the day at a plant level. And then earlier discussion was about a gas volume, I think, for maybe even hourly limitation over an area, or maybe, I guess what I was interpreting was a portfolio of resources where the portfolio would have a set gas volume that was purchased, and you're looking for something to ensure that portfolio doesn't exceed the gas volume. Is that accurate, what I'm hearing? Is that kind of what is being asked?
I believe that's what I'm hearing as well, Bob. I think you summarized that correctly. It was almost two distinct needs, one being potentially on a per unit basis to allow that unit to accurately reflect its availability, to accurately reflect its costs without kind of limiting it, because to the extent it has, I don't know, 100,000 MMBTU that it's allowed to burn for the day. Well, depending on how much it's awarded in the morning will absolutely dictate how much is still left per hour throughout the rest of the day. And then I heard the total area potentially needing to have those limitations depending on what's going on with the gas system. So I appreciate that. I think that summarizes what I've heard as well. I guess if I take it a step farther, are there any concerns from the group, not just the ISO, but anyone on the call, with providing an entity the ability to reflect those limitations, right? Are there any, exposure opportunities or things like that from a market perspective that need to be considered to the extent that's a potential solution that we go down and investigate the feasibleness, testing it against those principles that we decided on early on? Any other comments on this particular issue here? I just looked at the time. We got about 12 minutes, and the last few slides are just kind of wrapping up and talking about what's next. So to the extent there's any more comments on this, by all means, raise your hand. If not, I appreciate everyone weighing in and providing their perspectives and help further educate not only myself, but everybody on this call with some of the issues you're facing. So thank you for that. All right, not seeing any other hands. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so next steps for the ISO in support of this assessment. So let me just throw out there that these next steps are going to be critical, and it's 100% based on all the conversations we've heard to date throughout this working group process, as well as the comments and the associated survey that you guys responded to. So all the current proposed solutions and thoughts around those solutions, by no means are those final, right? Just like the problem statements aren't necessarily, or just the current identified problem statements aren't the only problems that the policy may try to tackle, right? There's opportunity throughout this process until we start getting into, that straw proposal and things like that, for this group to get together, to meet and discuss, potential other solutions, potential other issues that haven't necessarily come up through conversation, or maybe when we start providing some of these data analytics that have been requested, maybe that data points to something else that we also need to kind of further talk about as a group. As well as when we start talking about, here you'll see that the ISO team is going to take back everything we've heard, look at it through the lens of policy, technology, and legal, and then kind of provide that initial assessment to the group based on some of those hurdles and what we kind of determine as low-hanging fruit, right? It's a quote-unquote simple implementation. It was deemed by you, the community, to be a higher priority, and we may be able to move quicker on getting something out there to help you manage that particular issue. We're also, through the survey responses, as well as through various comments, it's, let's provide, the request was to provide some context around the initiatives and/or FERC decisions that are related to this, specifically CCDEBI. There's a request for a matrix about functionality around CCDEBI, which problem statements that have been identified was that functionality intended to resolve, provide why it's still an issue, which we've already have here through discussion in this working group, and then kind of that will allow us to kind of take note of where we're at and where we need to go, right? As well as, help educate the community on any existing functionality, which I think we've done a good job. Katie did a fantastic job a few working groups back on providing what's out there today, but that matrix will further identify that. And then, again, once we fulfill those data requests, let's see what that data points to. That may provide a light bulb for whether it's the ISO or the community to be like, hey, we see through the data that's not necessarily the right solution to go down. Let's pivot and start talking about other potential solutions around that issue. All right. So as this information becomes available, we'll continue providing that to the community based on who's been participating in these forums. We will absolutely have opportunity for comments as well as additional surveys to the extent we need one. And based on those comments and/or survey, we will be setting up, upcoming meetings and things like that. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Isabella. All right, so next steps today, we had another working group call. We finished out those problem statements, so congrats to the team. I know it's been a grind, but through these discussions and through talking about potential solutions and things like that, I think we've really landed on a good set of strong problem statements for the entire team, the ISO team, as well as the community team to really think about as we take this next step in the policy phase. We provided a really quick glance of those survey results. This slide deck will be posted, so you can go out and take a look at them. As I stated earlier, there were a few questions that were asked. Once we discuss those as a team internally, we will be providing responses to those questions in a kind of a generic form. That way it's not, the survey is meant to be anonymous, but we'll kind of scrub those questions and provide those answers out there for the entire community to see. Identified early on was a action plan and/or issue paper being developed as a result of this. So we will start working on that with a target of sometime in November. And then any future meetings and things like that, based on those data analytic results and things like that, we'll absolutely be sending out surveys, potential meetings, and things like that. Next slide, please. All right, so this is just, again, in case you missed it early on, and the whole goal here was to develop those problem statements, do an assessment of those problem statements, again, data analytics, potential resolutions, things like that, allow that information to feed resolutions. As we talk about those resolutions, do we need to have further assessments? Do we need to go back and look at those problem statements? And it's just kind of an overall cycle that naturally, organically feeds one another. So I believe that's the last slide. So let me pause to see if there's any questions before we kind of conclude today's call. This link here is just out to the initiative page where all this information can be found. Again, I really do want to thank everyone for their engagement, and I look forward to your continued engagement on these topics. So let me pause there, see if there's any comments from the ISO team. Sylvia, if you had anything you wanted to mention, or if anyone from the community had a question based on what was just presented. All right, not seeing any hands. I will give everyone back 5 minutes. Thank you again for your time and have a fantastic week.